Yo. All right. Looks like we're about to get started. Apparently, we are live. We're hoping that this screen sharing functionality that I'm using right now works. Last week it froze and it was a total mess. So we've rebooted the router, we've rebooted everything. We're hoping that it's gonna go smooth today. So stick with me. Today we're going to dive into a deep dive into sampling. So what does that mean? A big part of my workflow in Ableton Live when making tracks is multi-sampling. So I use a lot of raw audio in my workflow, and that really started from not being able to afford a lot of hardware and borrowing hardware and having to record the parts I needed with that and then giving it back to friends. And then it also sort of came to fruition for me when probably in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, I had joined a bunch of message boards, and on the message boards, people were sharing homemade sample packs, and I loved the sounds that they had in them. Curtis Vodka was a huge influence on me. If you don't know Curtis's records, go look him up on Discogs. But he was a master at sampling, and he took every sample he used to make music and made all kinds of genre-based sample packs that were really good. And so when I started making music, I used his sample packs as sort of a foundation for just getting things started, just figuring out how to put sounds on the grid, and actually make music. And in its most rudimentary form, Ableton Live, you can just drop raw audio on the timeline and build a collage of audio and turn that into music. And that free form composition of music is super inspiring to me, and it's sort of what keeps me going as far as making new tracks. When I get bored or when I get tired of something, it's always just dropping random things onto the timeline in Ableton and just building stuff out of raw audio. So today what I wanted to do was walk you through how that works, basically, what you can do with just raw audio on the timeline, and then dive in a little deeper into the samplers that are built into Ableton Live, as well as the different ways that you can program and trigger samples, and then the different effects and things that you can do to a sample using some of these techniques. So I think the first thing that we need to kind of do is drop some audio on the timeline. And I think most of the stuff that we're going to look at today is from Loop Masters, which they make sample packs. Royalty-free sample packs are great. They're cheap. They're everything that you need to like start building some basic music, like basic techno, basic house. What you want to make, sorry, my dog is having a drink of water right while we're recording. What you want to make sure, though, is that you're not just following a format, right? Like the problem with samples is it's really easy to drop a bunch of sounds on the timeline, arrange them, and make incredibly boring music. So, admittedly, I've done that for a long time. I haven't been the most musically successful person, but I think in the last couple of years, I've developed some techniques that allow the samples to really be different and weird and fun. And so we'll dive into some of that today. So this loop pack that we're looking at in the left-hand side, I have no idea what it is. Let's go with frogs.stomp. And all I'm doing here is just grabbing a sample and dragging it on to the timeline. I'm going to get rid of everything else. We'll come back to those guys in a minute. But basically, let's see if the audio will play through here in the sound card. Yeah, cool. So basically what you're getting here is just a 4/4 kick drum loop. And that is fantastic. That one actually is pretty chunky too. I kind of like it. If we double click on the loop, down here we get all the fancy warp markers. These warp markers are what keeps the audio in time in Ableton. So if you were with us last week, we learned a bit about warp markers and what they do. We learned a bit about adding swing. So if you load in a generic loop, you can add different swings to it to rearrange those warp markers. A big thing that I do a ton, if I'm using one of these basic loops, is either I chop it up and rearrange it, which we'll get into in just a moment, or I change where the warp markers lie and I rewarp the audio into a different time signature musically. So you can grab these warp markers and move them back and forth. They stick to the beat grid, but when you zoom in, you can take them even more detailed into the beat grid, and you can sort of offset them. And this is something that I do pretty regularly, and it makes for the loops to just sound a little more interesting, and for them to be just a little bit less generic. This is actually a really good thing. I'm going to turn this channel off real quick and see if we can find some like some perk sounds. I'm going to go into one of my other folders. Let's go into the 2018 folder and pull down some samples from Z7252. It's a project, and in each project I keep a folder of samples that are sounds that sort of drive that project, right? So Z7252 has a sound, MarceauxMarceaux has a sound. And I'm gonna go into percussion, and I'm gonna grab some percussion. Let's grab a percussion. Do we have a percussion loop in here? Yeah, that was actually kind of nice. Okay, great. This one will work really good. So we're gonna put this on the timeline. And sorry, I'm checking my Slack to make sure that we are live and good. This streaming thing makes me so nervous. So these perks lie on a little timeline, and here's the problem. If you drag a generic loop that already has a rhythmic pattern onto the timeline that you bought off a sample pack, you run the risk of, one, it being very unoriginal. I can't say I haven't done it, but it can be very unoriginal and it can be very uninspiring. But the other thing is, you run the risk of having another song with the exact same sounds in it, right? Like if somebody else did the same thing and y'all are both super lazy, then you could have a song that essentially has the same rhythm patterns, the same sort of elements, and that's weird and awkward. So what I try to do is, when I build the basis for a track, anything that I put on the grid that I have purchased or that doesn't come from a sample that I've made, I generally change it a lot. Like I change it so much that you would not recognize the original place from where it came. You can do that with intention, because that can be very interesting in itself, right? To see how far you can manipulate a sample. But the other thing is, you want to make it fit in with whatever you're making. So if I know that my track needs a little rhythmic pattern, I can start with this as a foundation, and then I can manipulate it to actually complement the track more. And so I do that a lot, because the other thing about samples is, when you drop something in that is a certain pitch or a certain key, it can harmonize with what you're working on, or it can clash, right? It can be out of key and it can sound really bad. It may be a sound that you want to use that's an interesting sound, but you need to get it in key, right? So let's start first with just rearranging this perk, and I'm gonna chop him down so that he's just a really simple 4-bar loop. And if you're using the warping method to change the loop, what you want to do is double click on the transients that you're going to move, right? Any ones that you don't double click on will move with the transients between it. So like if I move this guy and I move this guy, the one in the center has moved as well. So if I don't want him to move, I need to double click him and he'll stay in place. Then I can drag the patterns out and I can actually change where the warping lies, right? So now that I've snapped them into this is more of like a straight up 4/4. I'm going to go ahead and rearrange some of these guys too. Normally what I would do is I would do playback, and then I would listen to this and sort of see how it sounded. We'll hope for a happy accident. Sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. The other thing with this technique is, everything to the right of where your loop is, of where your loop ends, is edited out, but I haven't consolidated that loop down. So I can drag more elements to the left and more will appear on the right-hand side because I'm actually just cutting the envelope of the loop right there in the center. So I'll drag that guy back. All right, so let's hear exactly what this sounds like now that I've rearranged it. Okay, so pretty weird. And you can tell that it changed some of the markers, but I'm going to play the original. And I'm going to play the one we modified. So it still sounds pretty close to the original, but it is in a different pattern, right? So what I would do generally is then I would go back and I would play it over the kick drum or whatever I was playing with and actually build a rhythmic pattern out of it. The other thing that you might notice is that in the place where we drag the transients, the audio gets a little crunchy. There's not enough audio data when you spread transients out too far to fill that in. So it gets like a little digital sounding. It's not good in my opinion. So a great way to fix that is to change your warping mode. If you go down to the warp inside of the sample in the bottom part and you click the warping mode, usually the default is like either beats or complex. I change it to complex pro. I switch the formats to 0 and I change the envelope to 256. And essentially what this does is it processes between the transients a little bit different. So if you're warping a really long file in Ableton, for some reason, like if you've dropped a whole track in Ableton and you're going to chop it up and do stuff with it, you pretty much always want, after you've set your warp markers, to set Complex Pro into place and to change the formats and the envelope into this. Because if you do really drastic changes to the tempo of it, whether that is through warping or whether that is through some other method, you're going to get this weird crunchy audio. And that's just simply Ableton trying to figure out what's going on between the transients when the audio is stretched. Or it's changing the pitch between those transients and it's doing so in a digital way that just doesn't sound good. So let's listen back to it now. Cool. So it sounds just a little bit smoother. It's taken a little bit of that weird digital artifacting out of it. And what I could do is go back and play it again and again and again and redo that. But I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to say this is not a technique that I use as much as the next one. So I'm going to drag the exact same percussive elements into the audio. These are the same ones we had. And I'm going to select on each transient. So I'm going to select here and I'm going to hit Command E. And what that does is it simply chops the audio right in place. So if I did it here again, it would chop the back end of the audio and then I could just drag it out and you would have a new one. So if I wanted this piece, I could chop it again, drag it out, chop it again, drag it out. I could do this forever, right? I could chop the audio. The next part that I would do to make this in rhythm with the track that I was making is that I would just drag it into place. So this is just really simple chopping and dragging things into place of where you want them. So if I wanted to do a simpler form of that, what I could essentially do is I could grab a kick drum out of another folder. Let's go to drum hits, kicks, grab a kick. There we go. Yeah. Oh my gosh, all these are kind of annoying. Okay, there's a basic kick. And I could click, drag, and duplicate that over and over and over again, right? And I'm going to keep all of this inside 4 bars. We're going to lock our loop in. Okay, so let's just keep clicking and chopping and chopping and clicking. This is like making a girl talk album. You just have to keep chopping until something sounds good. I'm going to do this one. Zoom in and grab these before the transient marker. Do that down here too. Chop, 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 chop. Okay. This is also a really fun way to do bootleg remixes and edits. So last week we mentioned that a lot of electronic music producers get started as DJs and then realize that they want to edit tracks or make remixes, so that they have sort of exclusive content for their DJ sets. And this is a lot of what I did when I started making music. I still do it today. So if I make an edit of a song, I'll load it in, chop the song into 1,000 pieces. I'll take out the breakdown. I'll, take out the intro. I'll use the intro to make a layer on top of the regular track and then rearrange the drums and add drums and take drums away. Take out choruses. I hate bridges. So sometimes I'll take out a bridge and I'll just have verse, chorus, verse, chorus. It makes it more dancey. You don't have like these weird refrains. So you can totally do that with your favorite audio, and I suggest if you're gonna practice in Ableton and you're gonna try to get good at using it down the road, the best place to start is to take some of your favorite songs and make your own original edits. Don't put those online for sale. Don't put them online for sale unless they're really good. Like if you're gonna steal somebody's music and resell it, it better be damn good, and it better be different than the original. I think we release bootleg packs sometimes. And I try to stick to artists that either, their IP is owned by some giant record corporation and they're not going to miss 200 downloads. Or I try to stick to something that is like extremely pop. And anything like that, we never actually sell it either. We primarily just give it away. But this is a big thing that our friends group does too. So all of our producer friends, we make edits and remixes and give them to each other. And that's a really fun thing because I've given people stuff, forgotten about it, and then been somewhere and heard it. Like, oh, this is my edit. Like, this is my version. I totally didn't even realize that people were playing it or that it was out. So super cool. All right, back to chopping audio. So this is the simplest way to sample something. And if I just play this really quickly through. Yeah, so not very interesting, but it's going to rearrange what this sounds like. And what I would do is I would then just listen to the kick drum play, and I would then just rearrange all of these samples to be right in time with whatever I wanted. So I'd most likely make a polyrhythm out of it because percussion generally sounds really good when it sits between the kicks or between any of the major sort of elements in the percussion. So I would go in and do half rhythms and quarter rhythms and all kinds of stuff with these chopped versions. And that's really like the simplest, quickest way to just get something working in the audio space. Another thing that you should do though, if you chop the audio, is Ableton makes these tiny envelopes at the end of anything that you chop. And what these envelopes do is they keep the audio from making a click sound. So if you've ever chopped audio in an older program, like say Pro Tools, if you chop it right on a waveform in a certain position, you'll get this crunch or this click at the beginning or the end of the sample. So Ableton automatically puts a volume envelope inside the clip so that you can change that envelope, and you can ramp it by grabbing the center. So you can have it fade out exponentially, or you can do a sine or cosine. We're not going to get into some math right now. And the other thing is you can grab it and take it all the way down. So if, say, the attack on the sample was too quick, you could use this envelope to sort of add less attack or more attack. If you chopped it right on the line and you chopped a little too much off, you can pull it back and have some more attack. The thing that people forget about these envelopes is that they're there. And so Ableton adds the envelope, and then there's a little bit of audio missing at the beginning, or it sounds like it has too much attack on it. You can't figure out why. Usually it's because these envelopes are hidden when you click off of the clip. So either that or they're tiny. Like they're like that and you can't see them. So just remember that they're there. If you go up to another piece of audio, you may see them overlapping in this X. And what that is it's a crossfade between two clips. So you can grab that crossfade and take it out and put your fade in, or you can drag it the opposite direction and you can add a crossfade so that they're smoother and mushed together. I'll show you guys in a future tutorial how to make a perfect DJ mix recording in Ableton. So coming out of CDJs and into Ableton Live, and how to make a perfect recording. But that crossfading element becomes incredibly important when you make a mistake and you want to edit it out. That crossfade can leave pieces of the edit in, and you can lay drums on top, and then you can fix your mixing mistake. We'll get into that in a future tutorial, but just know that the crossfade is there and that it's another part of the sample that exists. That's a built-in enveloping system inside of Ableton Live. All right, so we haven't made anything interesting. Let's get rid of that and let's talk about making something interesting. So the next technique I want to show you for sampling, I think, is generally, oh, we have a question. Yeah, they want to know how to turn the envelopes on and off. So the way that you can turn them off in the settings so that when you drop something on the stage, it has no envelopes. I honestly don't recommend that. I think that I use the workflow of dragging audio onto the stage so much that I'd never turn the fade envelopes off. But you can actually get rid of them too if you're using audio in a manner where it's actually screwing it up. Did that answer the question? I'm not sure if it answered the question. Micah, chime in the chat and give some feedback if that did not answer how to turn them on and off. Okay, so sampling techniques. Let's get into that. So Ableton has a bunch of samplers, right? It has simpler, it has sampler, it has drum rack, it has all kinds of things. You could argue that Wavetable has a sampling element to it. And so you could essentially multi-sample in 20 different ways, right? If you knew how to use each one of those samples. But my thing is make it quick, make it dirty, and get it done. So the first thing that I want to show you is dropping samples into a MIDI track. So what I'm going to do is get rid of all these audio tracks, and I'm just going to put a MIDI track in here. Get rid of that guy. And we're going to create insert MIDI, or you can Command Shift T for MIDI. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a synthesizer loop. So I talked about not being able to afford hardware. I think I've talked about it in every single live stream. I want to be able to afford hardware. When I do buy a bunch of hardware, which I've started to do, I don't necessarily want to travel with it. Like, I don't want to take it out of town or to another studio if I'm working somewhere else. So what I generally would like to do is multi-sample everything as much as possible and then use those multi-samples in certain interesting ways, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a synthesizer here. Let's just grab one. Yeah, that's nice. And with the MIDI track selected, so I've selected the MIDI track, I'm just going to drag it and drop it. Oops, I'm going to turn some of these things off. These aren't set like my normal way to do things. Into here, and I'm gonna hit slice to new MIDI track and then hit OK. So the cool thing it's gonna do is it's gonna actually build a drum rack sampler out of each one of those samples. So everything that was in here now is a MIDI signal inside a MIDI track, right? So if I get rid of the audio and I play it through, it's going to play that sample back exactly how it was. But now watch the drum rack. So now it's lighting up in succession, right? Which is super fun. So the next thing that I would do is I would download or use one of Ableton Live's sequencers. So Ableton Live comes with a couple of sequencers, I believe in the expansion pack. I like two very specific samplers that are made for Max for Live. So if you have the full suite, you have Max. Max, anyone can make an instrument, upload it to the internet, and you can download it and play with it. And there's a bunch of them for free. Like most of the things that you buy inside of Ableton's website that are sequencers or instruments are running on Max for Live. So I'm going to drop, let's see, I'm going to drop Rosner on here because I really like it. All right, so I've got a sequencer, and this guy looks kind of crazy, kind of intimidating, but he's not. What I do next is I just hit the random button. Okay, so I basically just built a 303 in like 2 seconds, right? So I've multi-sampled a 303 over here in the drum rack. It's given me some nice things, like I turned the attack up a little bit so there's no clicks. I turn the release way up because I usually I'm working with pretty small samples, especially when you're working with like something like this, like an arpeggio where all the notes are really close together. And then we're running it 16th. I'm gonna run it at an 8. Oops, no, I'm gonna go the opposite direction. And I can just keep hitting random until it gives me notes. And then the other cool thing is I can turn off certain notes. So if I didn't want some of these to play the whole time, and you could do this over and over and over again until you create some kind of like interesting pattern. Let's do it one more time. Let's do it with something else. I need like a loop. Let's grab a loop. Okay, yeah, that's real kind of weird and dramatic. Let's grab another one. Yeah, that's going to work really good. This is like something I would actually maybe use. All right, so I'm going to do that again. I'm going to hit... Oh, I have to select the piece of audio, and I have to slice to a new MIDI track. And notice here in the drop-downs, there's several ways to do it. So you can have Ableton detect the transient. You can do it by bars, which is interesting. You can do it half note, 16th note, whatever you want. I generally do it by transient when I'm working with this function. Okay, so I'm going to hit go. I'm going to turn the attack up just a little bit. Turn the release up a little bit. Turn the sustain down a little bit. Okay, I'm going to get rid of the MIDI that it created because I don't really need it right now. I'm going to get rid of the original audio track because I don't really need him right now. All right, and then I'm going to go grab a sequencer. This time I'm going to grab the ML185 sequencer. I haven't ever used this one, I don't think. Maybe I have a couple of times, but it works generally the same way. It's playing notes that are way outside of sort of the spectrum of how many samples I have loaded in. And to not spend too much time on this. Yeah, it's got some coarse tuning functionality, some stages. I don't want to go through a new sequencer and try to figure out how to hit inside of the exact notes that are triggered inside of this. But Rosner seems to be grabbing the exact notes we need. So I'm going to hit this guy. I'm going to hit random. All right, so we got that guy going. All right, let's add a stomp. All right, so I just added a 4/4 drum kick. And then the next thing I would probably do on top of this pattern sequence is I would add some sort of audio effect. Let's add like a reverb. Let's go with corridor. Maybe a delay. I watched a thing on YouTube today where a guy used like 150 delays per track, and it was it was really interesting, and it's got me like kind of wanting to use a lot of delays, although I probably shouldn't. Drop a delay on there. Start it on beat. Yeah. So like pretty quickly, you've written a melody with a little help from a sequencer and the random function. Um, this is something that when I'm feeling very uninspired, I'll just do it over and over and over again. And there's nothing wrong with letting the machines help you, right? Like that's the whole point of electronic music is that the fun things that you can randomly do with machines. So that's a really really good one. Let's see. So I have a technique that I use a whole lot, specifically in Z7252 tracks, using drum breaks. So let's see if we can work that up real quick. Let me find my breaks folder. I'm going to try to find some breaks that are not going to get us a copyright flag on our stream. Let's go back to here. And let's go to break beats. Where are my breaks? Yes, I do have a folder called Rave Shit. I feel like if you don't have that folder, you're really missing out. Give me 1 second. Digging through here. There we go. There's my breaks folder. All right. So tons and tons of breaks here. Drum and bass breaks and club breaks. So let's play a club break. All right, so shout out the Baltimore club community for uploading so many amazing chopped up breakbeat samples back in the day. That was really amazing of you all. All right, I'm gonna insert a MIDI track. Let me show you how to do this real quick. I'm gonna insert a simpler, blank. I'm gonna go back and grab that sample and pop it into simpler. Okay, I'm going to change simpler from classic mode into slice mode. And you'll notice what just happened. All of these little markers just showed up on the drum transients. You can change the amount of transients in the sample by selecting the sensitivity. So like the sensitivity adds some and takes some away. But essentially what this allows you to do is individually trigger each one of these markers. And then what I'll do is, it's a combination of what I did with the last effect, is I will just drop a sequencer on it, and I will change the sequencer, right, and make it hit random over and over and over again until I get something that kind of sounds interesting. Another thing I'll do is I'll change the play point. All right, check it out. Let's grab that. Let's grab some 808s. Yeah, so I have an 808 in every single key. This was another fun project where I just got a friend's 808 that didn't actually work very well, and then ran them through effects and just multi-sampled all the 808s. Let's play this loop. Yeah, see, it's already kind of cool, and the breakbeat is just running off of this random step sequencer, which is super fun and easy, and you can change it over and over and over again. So usually what I would do is go back in once I found like a groove that I really liked, and I would change the settings on the sequencer so that it was had different timing on it or is triggering the same sample in different patterns. And what it's going to do is it's end up going to make different drum melodies in random ways, and then you can stack those on top of each other and turn them on and off, or render them to audio and chop them down, and you've taken something that's like a pretty recognizable drum break and you've deconstructed it into something that works in your song that is, you know, that is yours uniquely. So I use that technique a whole lot. Let's see if we can do this with something else. Let's do it again. I always forget what folder I'm in. Let's go to breaks. It gets really crazy when you do it with drum and bass breaks. Like what I'll do is I'll do it with these, and it's crazy because look at how many transients it has. So you're gonna get like the most insane amount of stuff. But what I'll do is turn the sensitivity down so it's actually triggering more than one piece of the sample at one time. That one's really tough. That one's interesting. Change him back to here, slice him. Yeah, okay, that's kind of cool. Let's put a drum beat under it. Something really weird and dark. I use those drum layers quite a bit. I have no idea what these are. Yeah, that's nice. Cool. And then like stuck in the same folders. Let's grab like, not that. Something like this. Let's just take this very first kick. So you can see pretty quickly, like, I've worked this into a loop that we could probably then build on for a really long time. And I can take the same technique with the sequencer and just go nuts with it, right? Like I could load 100 synth sounds into it, or I could load any sort of number of things right into it and make a whole new sort of collage of sound. Let's give this technique one more try. Get rid of all this crazy techno stuff. Yeah, okay, we're back here. And let's try it with something other than a drum break and a synth sound. Let's try it with I have a lot of crazy congos. Yeah, this could be really nice. Cool, so you see how when I dragged it in there, it just snapped everything out because I've already have it set to transient and I've already changed the sensitivity. I'm going to knock the sensitivity down a little bit more so that it's only picking out the big major parts of that. And I'm going to hit my random button and then play it. Yeah, that's kind of nice. So the other thing that you can do here is change the fade out. That'll get rid of some of that clicking, and the fade in will do the same thing. So these are just adding a little bit of attack. So then what I would do is I would turn this guy off. I'm just going to turn it off. I'm going to duplicate it. Oops. Duplicate. All right, so now I have a second channel, and I'm going to hit the random button again. I'm going to turn it, I'm going to turn it back on, and I'm going to hit the random button again. Okay? So, oops, what happened? I killed it. We wanted to. All right, let's duplicate this guy. Cool. I'm gonna turn him back on, make sure he works. Oh, geez, yeah, I've killed him. Here, well, okay. For lack of better, I'd have to dig in here. I think it's sending. The other thing about Rosner is you can actually send the sequencer data to multiple tracks, which is really cool. But sometimes when you copy and paste it or take it off, it doesn't maintain which track it's sending that MIDI data to. But it really comes in handy when you have like a sample like this that you want to play and you want to trigger the same exact melody in, say, a synthesizer that's running on a different channel. So if I like the way these congos are playing and they were getting their MIDI signal from this step sequencer, I could then send that step sequencer out to another channel to control a different plugin, right? So it could have like a synthesizer VST that was playing in the exact same pattern as this. The other cool thing that it can do is you can send that MIDI data into an open MIDI channel and you can record it. So you have what this step sequencer is playing as raw MIDI data. And then you can do the same thing. You can load more samples on top of it, or you can load a plugin on top of that. And that is really nice. Another program or another plugin that does something very similar is Waves Ovox. So if I go to plugins and I grab it real quick, I'm just going to show you a quick example of this. It's really neat. You may have seen, if you're a producer, there's a targeted ad right now on Instagram where a guy is beatboxing into this software and it's like triggering his drums and it's triggering all the stuff inside of his DAW, and then he like starts singing and it's like his voice is a synthesizer. Inside of the Waves plugin suite, there is an amazing Vox that does all kinds of voice manipulation, voice effects. But the other thing it does is it detects the pitch of whatever note is being read into it. So you can send the MIDI data, and this is a new feature as of like a couple of days ago. You can send the MIDI data into an open MIDI channel and you can control anything on that MIDI channel. So you can do exactly that. So if you load it with a drum rack and then you beatbox, you can essentially beatbox into your drum rack and have drum samples play back, and it is really fun. And if you have a melody in your head that you're singing, you can sing it into your voice notes on your phone, play it back through Ovox, and then Ovox will make MIDI notes out of it, and then you can run a synthesizer on top of it, and you can write a song based on that, which I love. I'm never gonna sing on stream, but I will, hum in the car. I will hear a song that will inspire something else, and I'll just sing the notes. And then you can just come back home, drop the audio, drop this plugin on top of it, and then send the MIDI data for the note detection from this plugin into a sampler or into something else that you can then write a song on. So super cool, super fun. You could do that in the convert to MIDI in Ableton, but the problem is it just doesn't work that good. So what do I mean by that? That is a really interesting one. So if I drop a sample in and I like the melody. So let's say, let me grab like, I'm just digging in random folders at this point. I need synth loops. Let's go here and let's go to synth loops. This is the first one. Okay, cool. So here's a little ARPy little dude. I can drop him on to the stage, and I can hit convert melody to new MIDI track. So when I do that, what Ableton's going to do is it's going to try to detect the pitch and key and note of that sample, and then it's going to try to recreate that audio in MIDI. So you see down here, it popped me down a little MIDI guy, and it's going to try to trigger a note in the same key that that sample is playing. The problem is it generally doesn't work. Like it sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't, but a majority of the time it doesn't. So if I'm making like a bootleg remix, what I'll do is I will go and find the guitar tabs for that song, and then I'll just play them back on a MIDI keyboard. Or if you don't know how to play it, you can actually search for, like, I don't know, the Rolling Stones MIDI. And some nerd out there has converted every song that the Rolling Stones have into a MIDI file. And I think this really originated from people being able to download ringtones that these sites sort of spun up. But what it's great for is you already have all the MIDI data for everything in the song. So you can go back and reprogram the entire song with the MIDI that somebody's put out there. Okay, rewind, back to this. The convert to MIDI generally doesn't work well. So that one, he put a couple of notes. Let's see if it actually is playing what it sounded like. Yeah, it is triggering. It is triggering in key with that, but it's not triggering like it should. So let's try it one more time, and this time let's convert the harmony. It's gonna give us some crazy stuff here. Yeah, here we go. All right, so let's see what this says. Okay, if we ignore the absolutely terrible preset of this analog instrument, we do actually have MIDI data now that is in the right key of the sample and that is triggering at the same time. So you could just then delete that entire thing and go back and put your own plugins or your own samples on top of it. So generally what I would do is like come in here, I would clean it up a bit. I would take out any of the notes that it put in that are probably a mistake, like that guy. Like I have no idea what he's doing up there. There's probably a bunch more. I would select most of them. I would quantize them because when it converts, it doesn't always quantize onto the beat grid. So I hit like edit quantize, which is Command U. We quantize that MIDI data, and then we would work down from there. So you get into a lot of editing. It's easier just to write it yourself or to use that OVOX technique where it has an actual like really good plugin that's meant to send that data out. So yeah, anyway. That can be really fun though, because sometimes it produces things that aren't correct at all, and you drop your own plugin on it, and then it plays something amazing that you didn't even realize. So being lazy and making mistakes sometimes can turn out good. Not a majority of the time, but but sometimes. All right, we are about an hour in, and I think I'm only going to do like an hour 30 today. So let me roll over here, and I'm going to run to the chat real quick and see if you guys have any questions. We're streaming on Twitch, YouTube, and a bunch of other stuff. So if you do, just post these guys into the chat and we'll get them to Micah. If you could resurface those in Slack, it would help me. All right. So more techniques. Let's dive into multi-sampling synth sounds, because I think that that's something that's super interesting. I usually will start with a sound that I found. So I did an alias a couple of years ago called Bob Fisher. And Bob Fisher was all about taking 90s house records and sampling the hell out of them and then flipping modern songs in the bane of old house records, right? So I would take like, I don't know, like I took parts of like a Kanye track, like an old Kanye track, and flipped it into a 90s house bop. And then I would take like sort of bassy, EDM-y, dubstep-y stuff. I would rewrite it in the vein of like, a Hit Factory record or whatever. But a big part of that was finding synthesizer samples on old house records, putting them into a sampler, and then playing the melody from the new record in this old synthesizer that I found on a house record, right? So I didn't have access to vintage synths again. So the quickest way to do it, or the sort of easiest, dirtiest way to do it, was to find a synthesizer hit on the record that was a clean sample, and then multi-sample that out into a melody. All right, so what do I mean by that? Hold on one second. We've got stuff in the chat. Oh, okay. We do have 2 questions, and then I'll jump back into the multi-sample. Okay, so the thing about delays is delay timing. Allie's asking the best way to avoid too much feedback. Well, for one, there is a feedback knob, right? And I love going haywire with it, but you really need to be kind of precise in how you use it because it generates a lot of audio. The feedback does just that. It's a loop that compounds itself over and over and over again. And the more you compound that sound, the louder it gets. The important thing that AC, who's probably on the stream now, taught me was that delay and reverb timing are incredibly important, and the timing of those things isn't necessarily like built in to your DAW. Like it can do it like on a quarter measure or a half measure, but you can go and figure out the timing of the reverb of how it would be in real life, and then you can dial that in. So there's actually what's called a reverb calculator, and I've used the reverb calculator before on delays as well. The other thing is it's about using the right delay on the right instrument. I think that one of the best delay plugins that I use constantly is Soundtoys Crystallizer. I don't remember if we've looked at this in a tutorial before, but it has this great little MIDI sync function right here. And when you click that MIDI sync function, everything else in the plugin snaps to the MIDI time code, including the feedback, which is great because then the feedback is actually hitting on beat with everything else in the track. So it makes it sound really nice. And then the other thing is you really do have to envelope the effect in delay. You need to give it an envelope and control it. If you let it run crazy, it gets real out of hand. If I remember tonight, I'll post the Fact Magazine, or if Micah, if you could post that Fact Magazine in the chat, the producer that you posted earlier today, and watch how much crazy delay he used on stuff. And he's using hardware delay, so it's really rich and beautiful, but I'm not sure what he's doing with the timing. You could probably see it if you watch the video. All right, what does the MIDI default to Rhodes sound, or how does it? So Ableton tries to guess what the sample that you're converting sounds like to a human ear, and then it picks out of its bank of sounds when it slaps that on there, right? So it tries to find an instrument that sounds like whatever you're trying to convert to. The amount of how horrible it does, like the job that it does, is comical because it thinks that like a Giorgio Moroder arpeggio is like a Rhodes, like an acoustic, like sounding Rhodes piano. I don't get it. But if you need that Rhodes piano, like if you want to use a Rhodes piano, in your instruments, if you type in piano, there is actually several, including a Rose under electric. And then the instrument, under the instrument rack, under piano and keys, there's a bunch too. That's actually using an operator, which I don't know why it would use that, but yeah, that's what it thought to use. So if you need a Rhodes, there are Rhodes built into the instruments inside of Ableton Live. So you can find a stock Rhodes in there. Aside from that, there are like 3 or 4 really good free ones. So do a quick Google search for free Rhodes VST, because I had one on my old laptop that I used to use occasionally. I don't write much house music anymore, so I don't need like an actual Rhodes sound as much as I used to. But I was using a free plugin that I found off of like freeaudioplugins.com or something. And I know it's one that people use commonly because I've seen it on other people's tracks before. Okay, and then the last one, recommended free plugins. Ooh, this could be a whole tutorial unto itself. But honestly, the default instruments in Ableton are the best free plugins. They're like absolutely bonkers. So start with those, and then if you have the full Ableton suite, search Max for Live plugins, and there is a Max for Live plugin forum where people upload free plugins, they rate them, and they comment to them, and they tell you exactly what they do. And I'll come back into the comments section of this on YouTube, and I'll post a link to it because that is a fantastic resource, and that's where I grabbed these sequencers from, is the Max MSP Max for Live downloads forum. Okay, cool. So hopefully that, if you have more questions, post them. Micah's sending them to me in the chat because I can't see the chat right now, but he's sending them to me on that computer. All right. Let's get back to multi-sampling. I'm going to get rid of everything, and I'm going to insert a new MIDI track. And let's write some pads. I'm hearing Lounge Lizard is also a really good Rhodes plugin. Yeah, AC and Micah use Rhodes on everything. They write like sort of, I like to call it like R&B inspired house music. And they use a lot of like natural sounding instruments, whereas everything I'm doing on my side is trying to make things sound as regular acoustic instrument as possible. Like I'm running every single thing through some sort of crazy amp plugin or something to cause tons of distortion, or a saturator. So I'm not as familiar. I actually only use in my music about 3 VST instruments. And I think I said this in one of the first tutorials, but I only use UHE Ace. I use Native Instruments Massive, which is a plugin that like is famous because Skrillex made all of his dubstep hits with it. But it makes really great bass noises, and it's stupid simple to use. And then, I mean, those are the 2 main ones that I actually use. Anything on top of that is all audio effects plugins. I just feel like if I can't sample it or I can't make it with a few plugins, the thing is, okay, and this is the theory behind this. If you have 150 plugins and all of them take you 3 weeks to even learn how to use the basic features, right? So you can start manipulating patches and doing your own stuff. Think about how much time that is that you could have been writing music. Like you could have been writing music for months, years, right? And instead you're dicking around inside of a VST that may suck. Like it may not even make great sounds. So what I've done is I've experimented with different VSTs, but the ones that I found that work really well, or that I can learn really quickly and make them do what I want them to do, are the ones that I generally stick with. And then if I'm looking for a specific sound and I can't make it with those VSTs, I don't know how to use like the synthesizer to actually make the noise I'm looking for, then I look to sampling, right? So then I look for, okay, what is the root of the origin of this sample? Like, is it a sound I heard inside of a movie, or is it a sound that maybe a machine makes? And I'll go out and try to find that sound or record it myself, and then I'll multi-sample it. All right, so I hope that helps. Don't waste all your time learning synthesizer plugins. You'll never write good music. Well, you may write good music, but you're going to waste a lot of time. Okay, getting back to this, let's grab some pads. Let's do a quick multi-sample here. Um, Actually, let's grab some rave sounds. I'm feeling kind of funky tonight. Oh no! Oh, that's kind of nice. I think I've actually used this before. Okay, so I'm gonna grab instruments. I'm gonna grab a sampler. Grab a sampler. And drop this bad boy on there. Actually, no, I'm gonna grab a sampler, a regular sampler. Hold on, Mike is telling me something in the chat. Okay, we're good. And I'm gonna drop that sample onto here. Okay, now the difference between what we were doing earlier and simpler, where we were just playing things back, but we were playing them back in a different order than they were originally recorded in, is now we're gonna play things across the piano roll. And I don't have a MIDI keyboard hooked up down here because I am not at my real studio. I'm in my dining room. But my real studio, I have a MIDI keyboard, and essentially what I would do is I generally write melodies and I generally write like musical ideas before I write drums. So I'll write sorry, this is probably, you can probably hear my Slack going crazy. I'll generally write like a musical idea, whether it's a really simple melody or just something that's sort of ambient and evolving, or whether it's something that's like a guitar, power chord, whatever. And then I'll bring in and I'll write my drums. Some people do this exact opposite. So they have to build a drum pattern first, and then they have to play to the drum pattern. I don't write music well that way. I know a lot of people do write it well that way, but I do not. So what I'll do generally is start by just writing and figuring out a melody. So I loaded in this sample. So root key is A. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go find, I have some MIDI, just like some random MIDI stuff in here. Yeah, here's some random MIDI. Yeah. So I have all of these like, these are pre-recorded MIDI loops that are in certain keys, but a lot of times what I would do is like go and write a bunch of chords myself. But for time's sake, I'm just going to drop them in here because I have my keyboard. Let's see here. Here's a really simple one. It doesn't have multiple keys on it. Let's try. That's not what I was looking for. Give me 1 second. Yeah. Okay. Here's what I was looking for. Pads. Cool. All right. So now you're going to see in the playback that these things can jump up and down in key, right? So it's a single sample. Let's give it something a little more interesting. Okay, that's a really simple one. That's definitely like a housey MIDI sort of thing. And okay, so this is written in A minor, right? And the sample that I chose, I don't even remember what key it was written in. It's in A. So they're pretty close. It's not going to have to pitch very much to correct it to get it into key. But here's the thing, it pitched it into a much lower octave than the sample was written in. So generally what I would do is select all, so Command A on that MIDI clip, and I would just bump it up an octave. And in Ableton Live, if you hold down Shift and use the up-down keys, it moves it an entire octave. So see how it went up? And look, I'll do it again. Cool. Okay, so the other cool thing about the sampler, not the simpler, but the sampler, is that it has these zones, right? And so you can drop those samples in. You can drop a bunch of different samples into one sampler. It works just like an actual real old school sampler. So Right now, this sample is playing across the entire piano roll. But what you can do is you can grab that sample and have it play across a small percentage of the piano roll, right? So your first sound would only play from C1 to C3. Then I could go and I could grab another sound, and let's just grab like a different one of those. It's a saxophone. I hate saxophones. It's kind of interesting. Let's grab a sparkle. What's a sparkle? I try not to grab anything with a lot of melody in it. I try to use the smallest sort of piece. Yeah, we could use that. And I drop him in there, right? So now I've got a second sound that's going to play on the entire piano roll, except for the keys that the first sound is stacked on top of. So if I wanted to, what I could do is I could take that and drag it down, and I could have this sample only be triggered in the piano roll from C3 to C5, right? So you can see here, what you can do is you can stack a whole bunch of samples inside a single channel and have them all playing at the same time. When you sample an instrument, it's really important that you sample the instrument in a bunch of different keys, in a bunch of different octaves. And when you do that, when you record it, so like if I needed to record a grand piano, I would go and set my microphone on the grand piano and I would play the key. I would play a long note, I'd play a short note, and then I would move my way all the way down the piano. So I was playing all these different octaves of keys, and I would record those in, right? And I could even record them into the same file. I would drop them in here, and then I would select where those keys landed, and then I could essentially have my own grand piano inside of Ableton or in whatever your sampler is. So this is a really, really great technique for going out and grabbing instruments, finding session musicians, friends that can play really well, and not necessarily have them play music like off a sheet, like not pre-written music, but have them play really nice notes that you can then come back in and write your own music inside of the sampler. That is a trick that is old as time, and it saves millions of dollars for poor starving musicians because you can always find somebody who has a trombone or whatever, or a flute or whatever, and going and buying a flute, learning to play the flute, figuring out how to record the flute. It's too much. You know, if you really want to have that much ambition to play every single instrument in the band, go for it. Shout out Larry Hurd that plays like 9 instruments. But a lot of us really need to just get that sound, and then we can work through the creative process of writing a melody in that sound once we have it. So multi-sampling comes into play here. And what I do generally is I purchase or record sounds that I really like that fit stylistically in with the music that I'm planning to write for that project. I'll make like a mood board essentially on Spotify and on SoundCloud of songs that have the mood or the energy that I want to create something in. And then I will reference those songs when I'm looking for samples to sample to put into the music. So like for the Bob Fisher project, whenever I'm writing these like 90s house tunes that are poppy, I'm going and finding a bunch of old 90s records and I'm taking notes and I'm saying, okay, old 90s records played really simple step and repeats. They had organs. They all used the 707 clap. And those notes then when I come back in and I'm loading things into the sampler and I'm ready to write music as that project, then I will have the sort of influence that I need to say, okay, what do I need to do when I sit down at the computer? Am I just going to like sit here and fumble through loops all day? No, I'm going to look for the sounds that sound like this mood board. I'm going to construct a whole bunch of melodies that I can then write drum tracks to. And I'm going to pull those sounds from original sources that actually sound like what I want. So if I was going to write really dramatic techno that sounded like a cinematic sort of movie drama scape, whatever, I would go and I would watch a bunch of movies I would figure out what those sounds were, most likely orchestral things, most likely a lot of reverb, most likely a lot of tones that are generated from field recordings. So hitting on a table or, smacking an oil drum. I would record all those things down and find the samples for them. And then I would go back and write my music in the vein of that. And so sampling can put you in the right headspace. It can put you in the right place to sort of get there. And once you've gotten there and you've gotten your feet wet with that and you understand what the sound design for that project is going to be or what the mood for that is going to be, then you can really dig in. You can say, okay, what kind of synthesizers were used in 80s film? And you can go find those and you can record with those and you can work with those. But I think the first thing is sampling and multi-sampling really gives me a way to get started. And that's the most important thing with music. Like, I spent so many years where there was 150 unfinished tracks on my desktop all the time. And that sucks. Like, when you look at your desktop and you're like, oh my God, I've created nothing but all these loops, that sucks. So use the sampling to your advantage. That being said, we should probably use like the last 15 minutes to talk about the legality of sampling, and what you can and can't do and what you can and can't get in trouble for. So you are legally obligated if you record a sound. I'm sorry, not if you record a sound. If you use a sound that you've found, to have the license for that sound, meaning that it has to be licensed properly for you to make music with. So most sample packs, especially all the Ableton sample packs that they load in by default, anything from Loop Masters, anything from, there's like a bazillion loop sites, Beatport, Producer, any of those sites are going to be licensed when you purchase them for you to create whatever you want. The only thing you can't do is take those sounds and resell them in another sample pack, right? So you can't create your own sample packs out of them. Everything else is free to use. Where things get a little more complicated is when you're using samples from music that is not yours. So I mentioned the Curtis Vodka sample packs earlier, where basically a whole genre of club music was created from sample packs that sampled old funk records, and a whole sample pack was created from Bali funk records that existed in South America and white kids didn't know about, so they used all these samples. And then there's all these Bali funk artists that basically got ripped off because they didn't know how to license their music properly. And there's a lot of examples like this. I worked for a record company that had like a viral hit, and they had used a sample from a reggaeton record that was like, in the breakdown, there was this one exclamation sound, and that exclamation sound was from a reggaeton record. The song went viral. They weren't big producers until the song went viral, and then they had like 1 million downloads in a month, and then they had 10 million, and they had 17 million. And of course, several artists, not just the reggaeton artists, but several samples in that song were identified. They came after him and they ended up having to split the profits like 12 ways. So the guys ended up making like $5,000 off a record that sold 10 million copies or something. So you really want to make sure that you record, if you take something that you didn't record yourself, or if you take something that could possibly have belonged to someone anywhere down the line, you want to make sure you record what that is. You want to record where you got it, what your intention was, because genres spin out of sampling copyrighted music. Drum and bass would not exist if there wasn't funk records that had been sampled and sped up. Baltimore Club would not exist without without the same breaks being rearranged in a different way. And Vogue music would not exist without the Ha sample from Masters at Work. So, entire genres are created out of illegal sampling, and they beget really beautiful and amazing things. But at the same time, if you are an artist that is selling your music, and I say specifically selling and not giving away, you should be aware that the wages from that music can be garnished if you haven't cleared the sample appropriately. And we could have a whole talk on music licensing and clearing samples. Some of the greatest records in the world never came out because samples were not able to be cleared. So you just want to be aware that if you're going to write something, and you'll probably write something really amazing, and you use a sample, you should know where it came from so that you can properly license it, or after the fact be willing to give up a majority of any profits from the sale of that song. Okay, that's sad. I don't want to end on a sad note, but you have to be realistic when you're talking about these things too. It's a hard lesson to learn. That being said, like I said, a majority of the amazing dance genres and club genres that we listen to nowadays would not be around if it weren't for people creatively using samples and manipulating samples. So, okay. So anyways, I dropped the sample in a few minutes ago. Okay. So you can see everything playing in this lower octave is hitting this guy. So I'm going to scoot him back and give him C1 through C5. Another great thing that I love to do once I'm multi-sample and I have like a little bit of like whatever this is going on, it sounds like Dead Mouse, but another thing I really like to do is I'm a big fan of the arpeggiator. Two of my very first songs that ever got any play on anything were built around the Ableton arpeggiator, arpeggiating sample sounds. And it's just so much fun. So I'm going to show you that real quick. So we have a multi-sample with this guy in there. It's like pretty cheesy EDM, whatever. We're not paying attention to that. I'm going to drop the arpeggiator on it. And then actually I'm going to select an arpeggiator out of their defaults. Let's go bouncy chords. Oh my god, I can't dial in a 16th there for some reason. The other cool thing is you can just change the start point, so you can drag the start point anywhere you want. And you can find another piece of the sample that works better than the one that you're playing. Ooh, that's cool. That would actually make like a really good, like I was talking about, 90s house record. That could be really fun. You could make a hardcore record out of that too. It's just a 180. Anyways, you can do a lot of fun things with the sampler. I built out racks to for myself to specifically use where I had a 707 and because I'm an idiot and I was broke, I sold it. And then after I realized the fact that it was like the main drum machine that I used, it also didn't have MIDI in out. It wasn't modded correctly either. So I didn't really know how to use it. But I borrowed it back from the guy and I built a sample rack in this sampler that is all the 707 sounds, and it's the 707 sounds in like three different with 3 different releases and 3 different timings on them. And I've been using that now for like probably 12 years. And every time I move computers, I just download it off Dropbox and install it again. And it's just a sampler with all my 707s in it. And it's cool because it sounds like it's mine. Like I didn't record it very well. I didn't know how to record it very well, and so the fact that it's kind of a shitty recording, but I've like done a bunch of stuff to it, makes it sound very unique. So I would highly recommend doing things like that. I don't have a 303. I use a 303 a whole lot. My buddy who lives around the corner has one. So when he's going out of town, I ask him if I can take it for 3 days, and I just record a bunch of samples and I put it in sampler, and then it's great. It sounds like I have a 303 and I don't. So anyways, all right. Do you guys have any questions before I jump off of here? Let me jump back to the chat. Micah, if you're around, surf questions into the Slack so I can see them. The problem is we're broadcasting on a bunch of different platforms, so I have no idea which platform to go to actually check the chat. If you got here from my link, you're probably watching YouTube. If you got here from Future Everything, you might be watching Twitch or Periscope. Yeah, is there anything else that I may have missed? I can't see anything. I'll give you just a minute more on the questions. Drinking these really expensive teas. It's my like luxury purchase for quarantine. All right, cool. I think we're good. If you have any questions, if you think of anything later tonight or tomorrow, or you're messing around and you want one-on-one Ableton help, I'm always around to FaceTime, screen share, help you through things. Hit me up on social media. I'm at MarceauxMarceaux. On Instagram, I'm at NetFuel on Twitter, which is a little confusing. I'm going to switch Twitter handles here pretty soon. And I'm at MarceauxMusic on Facebook as well. I don't think there's anything else that I'm on. But yeah, shoot me a message on social media. I'm glad to do one-on-one question answering. If it's simple things, we can go back and forth. I do all kinds of Ableton instruction, and there'll be more of these streams online. I think they're getting a little bit more casual, which is good. So we're going to definitely do more of them. I think next week we're going to do a shorter one, and I'm going to teach you guys how to record the perfect DJ mix in Ableton Live. So we'll hook up some equipment, and we'll record into live, and we will then go back and correct mistakes or make edits or do all kinds of stuff. This is really good if you're going to record like a podcast for a major radio network. Like everyone has an essential mix, and when you hear it, it sounds absolutely flawless. And I've seen a majority of these people DJ in real life, and they are not absolutely flawless. So I'll show you how to record into Ableton, record each channel independently, and then build something out from there. So it's my other cell phone. It's probably a spam call. All right, everybody. Thank you so much, and hit me up. Thanks.